In a world where dreams are often crushed before they can take flight, where talent remains hidden in shadows, and where society decides who deserves a chance based on appearances rather than ability, one young woman's journey would challenge everything people believed about potential, perseverance, and the power of a single moment to change everything. Sarah Martinez had spent 3 years of her life living a double existence. By day, she was invisible, just another face in the crowd, working at a local diner, serving coffee to customers who barely acknowledged her presence. But, when the sun went down and the world around her fell asleep, Sarah transformed into someone else entirely. In the silence of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, she became a warrior, training with an intensity that would make professional athletes weep. Her hands, scarred from years of secret practice, held secrets that could shatter records. Her eyes, often downcast during the day to avoid unwanted attention, burned with a fire that could light up stadiums. Her heart carried the weight of a dream so big that it terrified even her, the dream of proving that greatness doesn't always come from privilege, that champions can emerge from the most unexpected places. But dreams, no matter how powerful, mean nothing without opportunity. And opportunity, Sarah had learned, was something that rarely knocked on the doors of people like her. That is, until the day everything changed. The day when a single shot, one perfect, impossible shot, would expose the secret she had guarded so carefully and thrust her into a world she had only dared to imagine. This is the story of how 3 years of hidden training, of bleeding in silence, of pushing through pain when no one was watching, culminated in a moment that lasted just seconds but changed a life forever. It's the story of how the most unlikely person became the most unstoppable force, and how sometimes the greatest victories come not from those who have everything handed to them, but from those who have to fight for every single breath. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her sleeve as she carried another tray of steaming coffee cups to table 6. The morning rush at Pete's Diner was always brutal, but today felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the autumn sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor, or maybe it was the conversation she couldn't help but overhear from the booth near the back. 3 men in expensive suits were discussing the upcoming regional athletics championship, their voices carrying the kind of authority that came from years of making decisions about other people's futures. Sarah recognized one of them from the local newspaper, Marcus Chen, the head of the Regional Sports Commission. His presence at Pete's Diner was unusual, to say the least. The problem is, Marcus was saying, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision, we're seeing the same faces year after year. The same training academies, the same privileged kids with their private coaches and unlimited resources. The sport is becoming stagnant. The man across from him, who Sarah later learned was Dr. William Hayes from the State University Athletic Department, nodded in agreement. The public is losing interest. They want to see something real, something authentic. Stories that inspire people, not just displays of technical perfection from athletes who've had every advantage since childhood. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she refilled their coffee cups, trying to remain invisible while absorbing every word. The third man, younger than the others and wearing a press badge that identified him as Tom Rodriguez from Sports Weekly, leaned forward with interest. "So what are you proposing?" Tom asked, his pen already moving across his notepad. Marcus glanced around the diner, his eyes briefly meeting Sarah's before moving on without recognition. "We're opening the championship to walk-in tryouts. Anyone can show up next Friday at the regional training facility and demonstrate their skills. No academy affiliations required, no recommendations needed. Just pure talent." Sarah's heart stopped beating for a moment. She had dreamed of this opportunity for 3 years, but it had always seemed as impossible as touching the moon. Her feet carried her automatically back to the kitchen, but her mind was racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. That evening, as Sarah locked up the diner and began her familiar walk toward the abandoned warehouse district, her thoughts were consumed by the conversation she had overheard. The old Brennan manufacturing building had been her secret sanctuary for over 1,000 nights, a place where she could transform from the invisible waitress into the athlete she truly was. The warehouse had been empty for almost a decade, its windows boarded up and its entrance hidden behind overgrown weeds. Sarah had discovered it during one of her late-night walks, when the pain of her unfulfilled dreams had driven her from her tiny apartment in search of somewhere to scream without being heard. Instead of screaming, she had started training. Inside the cavernous space, Sarah had created her own private training facility using whatever materials she could find or afford. Old tires served as targets, makeshift weights crafted from concrete blocks helped build her strength, and painted lines on the concrete floor marked distances and angles with mathematical precision. Every piece of equipment told a story of determination and resourcefulness. Tonight, as she changed into her worn training clothes behind a makeshift screen constructed from old shipping pallets, Sarah felt the familiar transformation beginning. The exhaustion from her 12-hour shift at the diner melted away, replaced by the focused energy that had sustained her through 3 years of secret preparation. Her training routine began the same way it always did, with meditation and visualization. Sarah would close her eyes and picture herself in a real competition arena, feeling the weight of expectations and the electricity of a crowd's attention. She would imagine the pressure of having only one chance to prove herself, of knowing that everything depended on a single moment of perfect execution. The sport that had captured Sarah's heart was competitive archery, specifically the precision shooting discipline that required athletes to hit targets from extraordinary distances under extreme pressure. It was a sport that demanded not just physical skill, but mental fortitude that could withstand the crushing weight of high-stakes competition. Sarah had fallen in love with archery during a middle school demonstration, watching in awe as an Olympic athlete effortlessly hit targets that seemed impossibly small and far away. While other students had been impressed by the spectacle, Sarah had been transfixed by the athlete's perfect stillness, the way she seemed to become one with her equipment and her environment. But archery was an expensive sport, requiring specialized equipment, professional coaching, and access to proper facilities. Sarah's family had barely scraped together enough money for basic necessities, let alone luxury pursuits like competitive athletics. Her dreams had been gently but firmly discouraged by well-meaning adults who believed they were protecting her from inevitable disappointment. So Sarah had taught herself, starting with a basic recurve bow purchased with money saved from babysitting jobs and progressing through years of trial, error, and relentless practice. She studied technique videos online, read every book and article she could find, and analyzed the form of professional athletes with the intensity of a graduate student. The warehouse training sessions had evolved over time from tentative experimentation to sophisticated preparation. Sarah had learned to simulate competition conditions by training under pressure she created for herself. She would set timers that forced her to perform under strict deadlines, practice in uncomfortable positions and lighting conditions, and even train while playing recordings of crowd noise to simulate the distractions of actual competition. Her hands, once soft from a sheltered childhood, had developed the calluses and scars that marked a serious athlete. Her arms and shoulders had grown strong from countless hours of drawing and holding her bow. Her eyes had learned to see with the precision of a sniper, able to detect minute variations in wind patterns and lighting conditions that could affect her shots. But, perhaps most importantly, her mind had been forged into an instrument of unwavering focus. Sarah had learned to quiet the doubts and fears that tried to sabotage her concentration, to maintain perfect calm even when her heart was racing with adrenaline, and to trust in the muscle memory that had been built through thousands of repetitions. Tonight's training session took on special significance because of what she had learned at the diner. As Sarah knocked her first arrow and drew back the bowstring, she felt the familiar sensation of the world narrowing to a single point of absolute focus. The target, positioned 60 meters away at the far end of the warehouse, seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the boarded windows. Her release was perfect, smooth, controlled, and confident. The arrow flew in a graceful arc before striking the target with a satisfying thud. Sarah lowered her bow and walked the length of the warehouse to examine her shot. The arrow had hit within 2 centimeters of the exact center of the target, a result that would have been impressive in any professional competition. But impressive wasn't good enough. Not if she was going to have just one chance to prove herself against athletes who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Sarah pulled the arrow from the target and walked back to the shooting line, already preparing for another attempt. For the next 4 hours, Sarah pushed herself through the most demanding training session of her life. She practiced from different distances and angles, shot with different types of arrows to simulate equipment variations, and even blindfolded herself for several rounds to enhance her proprioceptive awareness. As the night wore on, her shots became more consistent, more precise, more confident. Each arrow seemed to carry with it all the hopes and dreams that had sustained her through 3 years of secret preparation. Each release felt like a small declaration of war against the circumstances that had tried to keep her dreams locked away. When Sarah finally packed up her equipment and prepared to leave the warehouse, the first hints of dawn were beginning to creep across the horizon. She was exhausted but exhilarated, terrified but determined. The opportunity she had dreamed of was now just 6 days away, and she knew that everything she had worked for would come down to a few moments of perfect execution. As she walked home through the quiet streets, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to step into a real competition arena, to feel the weight of genuine opportunity instead of just stolen moments in an abandoned building. The thought both thrilled and terrified her, but she knew there was no turning back now. The secret she had guarded so carefully was about to be revealed, one way or another. And, regardless of what happened, Sarah knew that she would give everything she had to that single, crucial shot that would determine her future. The next 5 days passed in a blur of nervous energy and desperate preparation. Sarah's co-workers at Pete's Diner noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. Where she had always been quiet and focused, she now seemed electric with anticipation, her movements sharper and more purposeful than usual. "You okay, honey?" asked Betty, the veteran waitress who had taken Sarah under her wing when she first started working at the diner. "You seem like you've got something big on your mind." Sarah forced a smile as she wiped down the counter for the third time in 10 minutes. "Just thinking about some possibilities," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. She couldn't tell Betty or anyone else about her plans. The fear of failure was bad enough without having to face the disappointment and pity of others if things didn't work out. Each night after work, Sarah's training sessions became increasingly intense. She had calculated that she had approximately 20 hours of practice time remaining before the tryouts, and she was determined to make every minute count. Her shooting had reached a level of consistency that amazed even her, but she knew that competition conditions would be entirely different from her controlled warehouse environment. On Wednesday evening, 2 days before the tryouts, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She needed to test herself under more realistic conditions, which meant leaving the safety of her secret training facility and finding a way to practice with actual competition-grade equipment and targets. The regional sports complex was located on the outskirts of town, a sprawling facility that housed training areas for dozens of different athletic disciplines. Sarah had driven past it countless times, always slowing down to peer through the fence at the world she dreamed of joining. Tonight, she parked her old Honda in the visitor lot and approached the main entrance with her heart hammering in her chest. The facility was officially closed, but Sarah knew from her research that several clubs held late-night practice sessions for serious athletes. The archery range was located in Building C, and, if her information was correct, the Advanced Precision Club met there every Wednesday night from 8 to 11. Sarah had spent hours crafting a story that would explain her presence without revealing too much about her background. She would claim to be visiting from out of state, interested in possibly relocating and looking for training facilities. It wasn't exactly a lie, since her life would certainly be changing dramatically if the tryouts went well. The archery range exceeded her wildest expectations. Professional-grade equipment lined the walls, targets were positioned at precisely measured distances, and the lighting was perfect for serious training. A dozen athletes were scattered across the range, each focused intently on their own practice routines. Sarah approached the range supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Janet who had the weathered look of someone who had spent decades working with competitive athletes. "Excuse me," Sarah said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'm wondering if it would be possible to rent some time on the range tonight. I'm visiting from out of town and looking for a place to train." Janet looked Sarah up and down with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating athletic potential. "You have your own equipment?" Sarah nodded, indicating the worn case she carried. "Nothing fancy, but it gets the job done." "Range fee is $30 an hour," Janet said. "You'll need to sign a waiver and provide proof of insurance coverage." Sarah's heart sank. $30 was more than she made in tips on a good day, and she certainly didn't have insurance coverage for athletic activities. But, before she could respond, a voice spoke up from behind her. "I'll cover her range time." Sarah turned to see a tall man in his 40s approaching them. He wore the kind of athletic clothing that screamed serious competitor, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to making quick decisions with confidence. "David Kim," he said, extending his hand. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you here for the open tryouts on Friday?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm thinking about it," she said carefully. David smiled. "Then, you definitely need some practice time on a regulation range. Consider it an investment in making the competition more interesting." An hour later, Sarah found herself positioned at lane 7 of the professional archery range, surrounded by equipment and conditions that surpassed her wildest dreams. Her hands shook slightly as she knocked her first arrow on the unfamiliar range, acutely aware that every other athlete in the building was watching the newcomer with curiosity and skepticism. The target seemed both closer and farther away than the one she was accustomed to in the warehouse. The lighting was brighter and more even, eliminating the shadows and variations she had learned to compensate for during her secret training sessions. Everything about the environment screamed legitimacy and professionalism. Sarah drew back her bowstring, feeling the familiar stretch in her shoulders and back. She had performed this motion thousands of times, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, she was no longer practicing in isolation, but demonstrating her skills in front of people who understood the sport at the highest level. Her release was smooth and controlled, exactly as she had trained it to be. The arrow flew in a perfect arc before striking the target with authority. Sarah lowered her bow and squinted toward the target, trying to determine the accuracy of her shot from 60 meters away. "Not bad," said a voice beside her. Sarah turned to see a young woman about her own age, holding a bow that probably cost more than Sarah's car. "I'm Ashley Winters. I train here most nights." "Sarah," she replied, still looking toward the target with uncertainty. Ashley smiled. "Want to walk down and check your grouping? I'm heading that way anyway." As they approached the target area, Sarah's nervousness transformed into amazement. Her arrow had struck within 3 centimeters of the exact center of the target, a shot that would have scored maximum points in any competition. But what stunned her was that Ashley's 3 arrows were clustered even more tightly, creating a group that could be covered by a quarter. "How long have you been training?" Ashley asked as they pulled their arrows from the targets. "About 3 years," Sarah answered honestly. "With whom?" This was the question Sarah had been dreading. "I'm mostly self-taught," she said, bracing herself for the reaction she expected. Ashley stopped walking and stared at her. "Self-taught? You mean you've never had professional coaching?" "Not exactly, no." "That's impossible," Ashley said flatly. "Your form is too consistent, your release too clean. You don't develop that kind of technique without serious instruction." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I've watched a lot of videos online, read everything I could find about technique and training methods. I practice every day." "Where do you practice?" "I have a private facility." Ashley's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching amazement. "You're serious, aren't you? You've actually taught yourself to shoot like that?" Over the next 2 hours, Sarah found herself the center of attention as word spread around the range about the self-taught archer who was hitting shots that would make veteran competitors proud. Athletes who had been ignoring her presence began gathering around lane 7 to watch her practice routine. David Kim, who had paid for her range time, positioned himself where he could observe her technique closely. After watching several rounds of shooting, he approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Sarah," he said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to give me an honest answer. Are you planning to compete in the open tryouts on Friday?" "I'm thinking about it," she said again, though her conviction was growing stronger with each successful shot. "Think harder," David said. "What you're doing here tonight, this isn't beginner's luck or natural talent having a good day. This is the result of serious, dedicated training. The kind of training that produces Olympic-level athletes." Sarah felt her carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her. "I don't know if I'm ready for real competition. This is just practice." "This is more than practice," said Ashley, who had been listening to their conversation. "David's right. Your consistency is incredible. I've been training with professional coaches for 8 years, and you're shooting as well as anyone I know." The attention was overwhelming, but also intoxicating. For 3 years, Sarah had wondered if her secret training was actually producing results or if she was just deluding herself in the isolation of the warehouse. Tonight, surrounded by serious athletes who understood the sport at the highest level, she was getting confirmation that her dream might actually be within reach. As the evening wound down, David approached Sarah one final time. "I'm going to be at the tryouts on Friday," he said, handing her a business card. "I scout talent for the Regional Development Program. I'm hoping to see you there." Sarah looked at the card, her hands trembling slightly. "What exactly happens at these tryouts?" 3 rounds of competition-style shooting. Elimination format, so you need to be in the top 8 after each round to continue. The final 4 earn spots in the regional championship next month. What kind of shooting? Precision long distance. 70-meter targets under pressure conditions. They'll start with 36 arrows over 6 ends, then reduce the field and increase the pressure with each round. Sarah's mouth went dry. 70 meters was farther than she had ever attempted during her warehouse training sessions. The longest distance she had been able to practice was 65 meters, limited by the size of her secret facility. "Have you ever shot at 70 meters?" David asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Not exactly," Sarah admitted. "Then, you need to get out here tomorrow night," Ashley interjected. "I'll be here anyway, and you can use the range to practice the actual distance." "David, can you arrange that?" David nodded without hesitation. "Consider it done. Sarah, whatever you've been doing to develop your skills, it's been working. Don't let this opportunity slip away because of nerves or self-doubt." As Sarah packed up her equipment and prepared to leave, she realized that her secret was already half revealed. The people at this range now knew that she existed, that she could shoot competitively, and that she was considering entering the tryouts. There was no going back to complete anonymity. Walking to her car, Sarah felt the weight of possibility settling on her shoulders. For 3 years, her dream had been safely locked away in the warehouse, protected from disappointment by the fact that no one else knew it existed. Now, with less than 48 hours until the tryouts, her dream was becoming visible to the world. The drive home gave her time to process everything that had happened. She had proven to herself and others that her training had been effective, but she had also learned that the competition would be even more challenging than she had anticipated. 70-meter targets would test the limits of her ability and push her beyond anything she had previously attempted. But, as she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, Sarah realized that she had already made her decision. Whether she was ready or not, whether she succeeded or failed, she was going to compete in the tryouts. The secret that had sustained her for 3 years was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Friday morning was just over 36 hours away, and Sarah knew that everything she had worked for would come down to a handful of arrows shot under the most intense pressure of her life. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with a determination stronger than anything she had ever experienced. Thursday night's practice session at the regional sports complex was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Ashley had been true to her word, arriving early to help Sarah acclimate to the 70-meter shooting distance that would be required at the next day's tryouts. The key thing to understand, Ashley explained as they set up their equipment, is that those extra 5 meters aren't just about distance. The wind patterns are different, the arrow drop is more pronounced, and the psychological pressure of knowing your target looks smaller can mess with your head if you're not prepared. Sarah positioned herself at the shooting line and stared down the range at the target that seemed impossibly far away. During her warehouse training, she had become comfortable with 65 meters, but this additional distance felt like crossing into an entirely different realm of difficulty. "Don't overthink it," Ashley advised. "Your form is solid, your release is clean. Trust your training and just extend your sight picture slightly to compensate for the distance." Sarah's first shot at 70 meters felt different from the moment she released it. The arrow seemed to hang in the air longer, its arc more pronounced as gravity exerted greater influence over its flight path. When it finally struck the target, Sarah was relieved to see that it had hit within the scoring rings, though well outside her usual precision grouping. "That's normal for a first attempt at this distance," Ashley said encouragingly. "Your fundamentals are all there. You just need to calibrate your targeting to account for the ballistics." Over the next 3 hours, Sarah systematically worked through the adjustments required for the longer distance. She modified her sight settings, altered her aim point slightly, and, most importantly, learned to trust her shot even when the target appeared deceptively small and far away. By the end of the session, her groupings at 70 meters were approaching the consistency she had achieved at shorter distances. More importantly, she was beginning to feel confident rather than tentative when shooting at the competition distance. "You're a quick learner," David Kim observed. He had arrived midway through the session and positioned himself where he could analyze Sarah's technique. "Most archers take weeks to adapt to a significant distance increase. You're doing it in one evening." "I've had a lot of practice adapting to different conditions," Sarah replied, thinking about the countless hours she had spent in the warehouse, learning to shoot accurately despite poor lighting, temperature variations, and improvised equipment. "Tomorrow is going to be intense," David warned. "The format is designed to simulate high-pressure competition conditions. 36 arrows in the first round, with the bottom half eliminated. 24 arrows in the second round, eliminating everyone except the top 8. Then, a head-to-head elimination round to determine the final 4. Ashley nodded grimly. "I've been training for this for 2 years, and I'm still nervous. The pressure gets to everyone, even experienced competitors." "What should I expect in terms of other competitors?" Sarah asked. "You'll be going up against some serious athletes," David explained. "Several current college champions, a few former professional competitors, and some rising stars from the major training academies. Most of them have been preparing specifically for this opportunity for months or years." Sarah felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "How many people usually try out?" "Last time they held open tryouts was 5 years ago. 63 people showed up, representing every level from weekend hobbyists to near-Olympic caliber athletes." The talent range was enormous. As the evening wound down, Ashley pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I need to tell you something," she said, her expression serious. "I've been competing in this sport for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone improve as quickly as you did tonight." "That's not normal." "What do you mean?" "I mean that most people who've been training for 3 years, even with professional coaching, wouldn't be able to make the adjustments you made tonight. You're not just naturally talented. You're exceptionally gifted, and your self-taught training has somehow prepared you better than traditional methods might have." Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with disbelief. "I just practiced a lot and tried to learn from every mistake." "It's more than that," Ashley insisted. "You have an intuitive understanding of the physics and psychology of this sport that usually takes years to develop. Don't let anyone tomorrow make you feel like you don't belong there." Driving home that night, Sarah's mind was churning with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had proven to herself that she could compete at the required distances, but she also understood that technical ability was only part of what would be tested the next day. The psychological pressure of competition was something she had never experienced, and no amount of warehouse training could have prepared her for shooting with everything on the line. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and crystal-clear skies. Sarah had barely slept, her mind running through shooting sequences and potential scenarios until exhaustion finally claimed her around 4 in the morning. She woke naturally at 6:30, her body's internal clock attuned to the importance of the day ahead. The regional sports complex was buzzing with activity when Sarah arrived at 8 o'clock, 2 hours before the scheduled start of tryouts. Cars filled the parking lot, and she could see athletes warming up on practice ranges throughout the facility. The energy was electric, charged with the anticipation of dozens of people pursuing the same limited opportunities. Sarah had chosen her outfit carefully, comfortable athletic clothing that would allow full range of motion without being flashy or attention-grabbing. Her equipment was clean and well-maintained, though she was acutely aware that her bow and arrows were basic compared to the high-end gear carried by many other competitors. The check-in process was surprisingly formal. Each competitor received a number, official paperwork, and a brief orientation packet explaining the day's schedule and rules. Sarah was assigned competitor number 47 out of 59 total participants. "First time at one of these?" asked the volunteer handling registration. She was a middle-aged woman with the kind of efficient competence that suggested years of involvement in athletic administration. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "Well, you picked a good one. The level of talent this year is exceptional. Several of these athletes could compete at the national level with a little more development." As Sarah walked toward the main archery range, she found herself surrounded by competitors who looked like they had stepped out of athletic equipment catalogs. Their gear was pristine, their forms perfect, and their confidence absolute. She overheard conversations about training camps, professional coaches, and competition results that made her feel like an imposter who had somehow snuck into a gathering where she didn't belong. The range itself was intimidating in its perfection. 10 shooting lanes extended toward targets positioned exactly 70 meters away, with wind flags positioned at regular intervals to help competitors read atmospheric conditions. Spectator seating flanked both sides of the range, and Sarah was surprised to see that several dozen people had already gathered to watch the competition. Marcus Chen, the regional sports commission head she had overheard at Pete's Diner, stood at the center of the range with a clipboard and megaphone. His presence reminded Sarah that this competition was more than just an athletic event, it was an opportunity that could genuinely change her life. "Competitors, please gather around for the final briefing," Marcus announced. The 59 athletes formed a loose semicircle around him, their tension palpable in the morning air. "Today's format is straightforward but demanding," Marcus began. "Round 1, 36 arrows and 18 ends of 2 arrows each. You'll have 90 seconds per end. The bottom half of scores will be eliminated. Round 2, 24 arrows and 12 ends, same time limits. Only the top 8 scores advance to the final round." He paused to let this sink in. The final round is head-to-head elimination. Single arrows, sudden death format. Miss the target completely, and you're out. Lowest score in any head-to-head match is eliminated. We continue until we have our final 4. Sarah's mouth went dry as she considered the implications. In her warehouse training, she had never practiced shooting under strict time limits or in sudden death formats. The pressure would be unlike anything she had ever experienced. "One final note," Marcus added. "We'll be conducting this competition in full view of the media and scouts from several major athletic programs. Perform well today, and doors will open for you that might never be available again. This is your chance to change your life." As the competitors dispersed to begin warming up, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since arriving at the facility. She walked to the practice range and began her familiar pre-training routine, trying to recreate the mental state that had served her so well during thousands of hours of secret preparation. Drawing back her bow for the first practice shot, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of the world narrowing to a single point of focus. The sounds of other competitors faded away, the pressure of the occasion receded slightly, and, for a moment, she was back in her warehouse sanctuary where only her will and skill mattered. The practice arrow flew true, striking the target within the gold ring that marked maximum scoring potential. Sarah smiled grimly and nocked another arrow. She might be the only competitor present who had learned the sport in complete isolation, who had never had professional coaching or access to ideal training conditions. But she was also the only competitor who had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this moment, who had dreamed of this opportunity every single day while building the skills and mental fortitude to succeed when it finally arrived. The first round was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and Sarah knew that everything she had worked for was about to be put to the ultimate test. Her secret was about to be revealed in the most public way possible, one arrow at a time, in front of judges and spectators who would determine whether her dream became reality or remained forever locked away in an abandoned warehouse. She took a deep breath, steadied her stance, and prepared to show the world what 3 years of hidden training had created. The call came at exactly 10 o'clock. "Competitors to the line for round 1. Marcus Chen's voice carried across the range with authority that made every conversation stop mid-sentence. 59 archers moved toward their assigned shooting positions, equipment in hand, dreams balanced precariously on their shoulders. Sarah found herself assigned to lane 4, positioned between a college athlete whose expensive gear probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary, and a middle-aged man who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had competed at the highest levels for decades. Neither acknowledged her presence as they set up their equipment, their focus already turned inward toward the challenge ahead. The first round format was deceptively simple, 18 ends of 2 arrows each, with 90 seconds to complete each end. 36 arrows total that would determine who advanced and who went home. As Sarah positioned herself at the shooting line, she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching from the spectator area, including scouts and coaches whose approval could open doors she had never imagined. "Competitors ready," came the announcement. "First end, 2 arrows, 90 seconds starting, now." The electronic timer began its countdown, and Sarah felt time slow to an almost dreamlike pace. She knocked her first arrow with movements that had been repeated thousands of times in the warehouse, drew back the bowstring until she reached her anchor point, and found her sight picture on the distant target. The familiar sensation of perfect focus descended over her consciousness like a comfortable blanket. The sounds of other competitors faded away, the pressure of the moment receded, and Sarah existed in the quiet space where only her breathing and heartbeat marked the passage of time. Her release was smooth and controlled, exactly as she had trained it to be. The arrow flew in a graceful arc before striking the target with a solid thud that she could hear clearly despite the distance. Without hesitation, Sarah knocked her second arrow and repeated the process, her movements flowing with the mechanical precision of years of dedicated practice. Time. The electronic beeper announced the end of the first round, and Sarah became aware of her surroundings again. Looking down the range, she could see her 2 arrows embedded in the gold ring of the target, close enough to each other that they appeared to be touching from 70 meters away. The scoring process for each end required all competitors to walk to the targets together, calculate their scores under official supervision, and return to the shooting line for the next sequence. As Sarah approached her target, she felt her confidence building with each step. Both arrows had struck within the highest scoring zone, earning her the maximum possible points for the opening end. "Nice shooting," said the college athlete from lane 3. His tone was friendly but guarded, the careful politeness of someone acknowledging a potential threat. "First competition?" "Yes," Sarah replied honestly. "Really? Your form looks pretty polished for a beginner." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to this, so she simply smiled and focused on pulling her arrows from the target. As they walked back to the shooting line together, she could sense him studying her technique with the analytical eye of an experienced competitor. The second end proceeded much like the first. Sarah's mental preparation in the warehouse had included extensive visualization of competition scenarios, and she found that the actual experience aligned closely with what she had imagined. The time pressure was manageable, the target distance was within her capabilities, and the other competitors were skilled but not superhuman. By the end of 6 rounds, a pattern had begun to emerge across the range. Several competitors were struggling with the pressure and distance, their arrows scattering across the target face or missing entirely. Others were shooting with machine-like consistency, their scores building steadily toward totals that would clearly advance them to the next round. Sarah found herself in the latter group. Her warehouse training had emphasized consistency above all else, and the countless hours of repetition were paying dividends under pressure. Arrow after arrow found the gold ring, her scores accumulating with steady reliability that drew increasingly frequent glances from other competitors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus Chen announced after the 9th end, "we have some exceptional shooting happening today. Several competitors are on pace to exceed regional qualifying standards." Sarah tried not to think about what this meant for her own performance, focusing instead on the familiar routine of knocking, drawing, aiming, and releasing. But she couldn't help noticing that spectators were beginning to cluster around certain shooting lanes, drawn by the drama of watching elite-level competition unfold. As the first round progressed toward its conclusion, Sarah became aware that she was attracting attention from the crowd. David Kim had positioned himself where he could observe her technique closely, and she noticed several other scouts making notes as they watched her shoot. The realization that her performance was being evaluated by people who could change her life forever was both thrilling and terrifying. The 18th and final end of round 1 arrived with Sarah holding a commanding position on the leaderboard. Her consistency had been remarkable, with 34 of 36 arrows finding the gold ring and her total score approaching what would have been competitive in professional tournaments. As she knocked her final 2 arrows of the round, Sarah allowed herself a moment to reflect on how surreal the entire experience felt. 6 hours earlier, she had been just another invisible waitress serving coffee to customers who barely noticed her existence. Now she was competing at the highest level of her sport, surrounded by elite athletes and watched by scouts who represented opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. Her final 2 shots were perhaps her best of the day. Both arrows struck within 2 centimeters of the exact center of the target, their precision so remarkable that spectators actually applauded when the results were announced. Sarah walked to retrieve her arrows with her heart pounding, knowing that she had not only survived the first elimination round but had distinguished herself among the field of competitors. The scoring process took 20 minutes, during which competitors clustered in nervous groups discussing their performance and speculating about advancement cutoffs. Sarah stood apart from these conversations, partly from shyness and partly because she had no framework for understanding how her scores compared to previous competitions or standard expectations. "Attention competitors," Marcus Chen announced. "The results of round 1 are complete. I will now read the names of the 30 athletes advancing to round 2. If you hear your name, please remain on the range. If not, thank you for your participation today." The list of advancing competitors was read in score order, from lowest to highest. Sarah listened as names were called, her anxiety building as the list progressed without including her own. Had she miscalculated her performance? Were the other competitors better than she had realized? Sarah Martinez. Her name came near the end of the list, indicating a score that placed her among the top performers of the day. Sarah felt weak with relief and excitement, her 3 years of secret preparation validated by inclusion among the elite field advancing to round 2. But the celebration was brief. Round 2 would eliminate 22 more competitors, leaving only 8 to advance to the final elimination rounds. The margin for error was shrinking rapidly, and the pressure would only intensify as the field narrowed. During the break between rounds, Ashley approached Sarah with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Your shooting today has been incredible," she said. "But you need to understand something about what's coming next." "What do you mean?" "Round 2 is where the psychological pressure really begins to show. The competitors who make it this far all have solid technique, but the ones who advance to the final 8 are the ones who can maintain their composure when everything is on the line." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what Ashley was trying to tell her. "How do you prepare for that kind of pressure?" "You trust your training and try not to think too much about the consequences." "But, honestly, Sarah, I don't know how you're handling this as well as you are. Most people competing for the first time are struggling with nerves by this point." The truth was that Sarah felt strangely calm, almost detached from the pressure that seemed to be affecting other competitors. Her warehouse training had been conducted in complete isolation, without spectators or official oversight, which meant that every shot had been a private conversation between her and her own standards of excellence. In some ways, shooting in front of others was easier than the solitary pursuit of perfection she had maintained for 3 years. Round 2 began with 24 arrows over 12 ends, the same time constraints but a field of competitors that had been winnowed down to only the most skilled and determined athletes. The difference in atmosphere was immediately noticeable. Conversations were quieter, preparations more focused, and every shot carried greater weight toward determining final advancement. Sarah's lane assignment had changed, placing her between 2 competitors who had clearly been training for this opportunity for years. To her left was Maria Santos, a 3-time collegiate champion whose form was so technically perfect it seemed almost robotic. To her right was James Crawford, whose equipment and bearing suggested connections to elite training programs and professional coaching. As round 2 progressed, Sarah began to understand what Ashley had meant about psychological pressure. The target seemed smaller, the distance felt greater, and every slight variation in wind or lighting conditions became magnified in importance. Several competitors who had shot well in round 1 began to struggle as the stakes intensified. But Sarah found herself entering an even deeper state of focus than she had experienced in round 1. The warehouse had taught her to be comfortable with pressure that she created for herself, and the external pressure of competition felt manageable compared to the internal demands she had placed on her own performance night after night in solitude. Her arrows continued to find the gold ring with mechanical consistency, her scores building toward a total that would ensure advancement to the final elimination rounds. By the end of round 2, Sarah realized that she wasn't just surviving among elite-level competitors, she was competing with them on equal terms, her performance indistinguishable from athletes who had enjoyed every advantage she had been denied. When the results were announced, Sarah's name was called third in the advancement list, placing her among the top 8 competitors and ensuring her place in the final elimination rounds where everything would be decided by head-to-head competition under ultimate pressure. As she prepared for the rounds that would determine her future, Sarah knew that her secret was no longer hidden. Everyone present now understood that something remarkable was happening, that the quiet waitress from Pete's Diner was capable of competing with the best athletes in the region. But the final elimination rounds would require more than just technical skill. They would demand the kind of mental fortitude that could only be forged through years of pursuing excellence in solitude, trusting nothing but her own determination and will. The single shot that would reveal everything was still to come. The final elimination rounds would be unlike anything Sarah had experienced or even imagined. 8 competitors remained, and the format was brutally simple: head-to-head matches, single arrows, sudden death. Missed the target completely, and elimination was immediate. In any other scenario, the archer with the lower score was eliminated until only 4 remained standing. Marcus Chen gathered the 8 finalists in a semicircle near the shooting line. "Ladies and gentlemen, you represent the finest archery talent in this region. What happens in the next hour will determine who advances to the regional championship and who goes home. The pressure is real, the stakes are high, and there is no margin for error." Sarah looked around at her fellow finalists and felt a moment of genuine intimidation. These were not just skilled athletes, they were proven competitors who had earned their places through years of dedication and achievement. Maria Santos stood with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to winning. James Crawford checked and rechecked his equipment with the obsessive attention to detail that marked a true professional. Ashley was there too, her friendship with Sarah temporarily suspended by the reality of direct competition. "The bracket has been determined by your round 2 scores," Marcus continued. "Lowest score shoots against highest, second lowest against second highest, and so on. Sarah Martinez, as the third-place finisher in round 2, you'll be shooting against David Park, who finished 6th. Sarah's opponent was a college sophomore who had been training since childhood with some of the best coaches in the country. His technique was flawless, his equipment state-of-the-art, and his composure absolute. As they took their positions on adjacent lanes, David offered her a polite nod that carried no warmth or friendship. "Single arrow," the range officer announced. 90 seconds on the clock. Highest score advances, lowest score goes home. Archers, take your positions. Sarah stepped up to the shooting line and felt the familiar weight of her bow in her hands. 70 meters away, the target seemed to shimmer slightly in the afternoon heat, its gold center ring appearing smaller than ever before. She was acutely aware that dozens of people were watching, that scouts were taking notes, and that everything she had worked for over 3 years would be decided by the next 90 seconds of her life. But, as she knocked her arrow and began to draw back the bowstring, something remarkable happened. The pressure didn't overwhelm her, it sharpened her focus to a degree she had never experienced before. Every distraction fell away, every doubt evaporated, and she existed in a state of perfect clarity where only the target and her arrow mattered. The release was the smoothest she had ever achieved, the arrow flying in an arc so perfect it seemed to defy physics. Time slowed to an impossible crawl as she watched its flight, knowing with absolute certainty even before it struck that this shot was different from any she had ever made. The arrow found the exact center of the target with mathematical precision, striking the tiny X-ring that marked the bullseye with a sound like a statement of absolute authority. Even from 70 meters away, Sarah could see that her shot was as close to perfect as humanly possible. David Park's arrow, shot moments later with equal technical skill, struck within the gold ring but fell short of matching Sarah's precision. The measurement was academic. Sarah had won her first head-to-head elimination match and advanced to the semifinals. As the other quarter-final matches concluded, Sarah found herself among 4 finalists who represented the absolute elite of regional archery talent. The atmosphere around the range had become electric, with spectators and competitors from earlier rounds gathering to witness what everyone recognized as exceptional competition. The semifinals would pit Sarah against Maria Santos, the three-time collegiate champion whose reputation for clutch performance under pressure was legendary. Their match was scheduled second, giving Sarah the opportunity to watch the first semifinal between James Crawford and Ashley. The match between James and Ashley was a masterpiece of precision shooting that had the crowd murmuring with appreciation. Both arrows found the gold ring, but James's shot was marginally closer to center, eliminating Ashley and advancing him to the final round. Sarah and Maria to the line, came the announcement that Sarah had been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. This was the moment that would determine whether her unlikely journey continued to its ultimate conclusion or ended one step short of the championship final. Maria Santos was everything Sarah was not: polished, confident, technically perfect, and accustomed to succeeding under pressure. As they took their positions, Maria offered Sarah a smile that was friendly but predatory, the expression of someone who had eliminated countless opponents and felt no doubt about doing so again. "Good luck," Maria said, and Sarah knew that she meant the opposite. Sarah's response was to close her eyes and return, in her mind, to the warehouse. She pictured herself alone in the cavernous space, with only her determination and her bow for company. She remembered the countless nights when exhaustion or doubt had tried to convince her to quit, and how she had pushed through those moments by sheer force of will. When she opened her eyes, Maria Santos was no longer standing beside her. The crowd was no longer watching from the spectator area. The scouts were no longer taking notes. There was only Sarah, her bow, and a target 70 meters away that represented everything she had dreamed of achieving. Her draw was smooth and controlled, her anchor point precise, her sight picture crystalline in its clarity. But, this time, as she prepared to release, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before: complete and absolute certainty that she was about to make the most important shot of her life. The arrow left her bow with perfect rotation, its flight path unwavering as it covered the distance to the target in what seemed like slow motion. Sarah watched it approach the gold ring, then the inner gold, then the X-ring at the very center of the target, knowing that this single shot would reveal everything she had kept hidden for 3 years. The arrow struck the target with a sound like destiny fulfilling itself. Even before the range officers could measure the result, Sarah knew that she had just shot the best arrow of her life under the greatest pressure she had ever faced. Maria's return shot was technically excellent, finding the gold ring with the precision expected from a 3-time champion. But, when the measurements were completed, Sarah's arrow was revealed to be closer to the exact center by a margin measured in millimeters. The roar from the spectator area was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. She had defeated a 3-time collegiate champion in sudden death elimination and earned her place in the championship final against James Crawford. As Sarah walked to retrieve her arrow, she realized that her secret was now completely revealed. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A self-taught archer with no formal training or institutional support had just eliminated some of the finest competitive talent in the region. The final match against James Crawford was scheduled after a 15-minute break, during which Sarah found herself surrounded by competitors, coaches, and media representatives who wanted to understand how her impossible journey had brought her to this moment. "Where did you train?" asked a reporter from the regional sports network. "How long have you been working with your coach?" inquired a scout from the State University athletic program. "What academy developed your technique?" wondered a competitor who had been eliminated earlier. Sarah answered their questions as honestly as she could, watching their expressions change from curiosity to disbelief as they realized that everything they thought they knew about athletic development and competitive preparation had just been challenged by a waitress who had learned to shoot in an abandoned warehouse. The final match was announced with ceremony appropriate to the drama of the moment. James Crawford and Sarah Martinez, 2 archers whose paths to this moment could not have been more different, preparing to settle the championship with a single arrow each under ultimate pressure. James was the favorite, and everyone present knew it. His technique was flawless, his equipment perfect, his competitive record extensive. He had trained for this opportunity his entire life, supported by coaches and systems designed to produce exactly this kind of moment. Sarah was the impossible story, the athlete who should not have existed, let alone succeeded. As she took her position at the shooting line for the final time, she carried with her every late night in the warehouse, every moment of doubt she had overcome, every dream that had sustained her through 3 years of secret preparation. The crowd fell silent as both archers prepared for the shots that would determine the championship. Sarah could feel the weight of attention, the pressure of expectations, and the magnitude of the moment settling around her like a heavy cloak. But, as she knocked her final arrow and began her draw, Sarah experienced the same sensation that had carried her through every challenge of the day. The external pressure transformed into internal focus, the crowd disappeared into silence, and she found herself alone with her bow and the target that represented everything she had worked for. Her final shot was not her best of the day, it was her best shot ever. The arrow flew with perfect rotation and unwavering trajectory, striking the target with such precision that the range officers had to use electronic measurement to confirm the result. When James Crawford's equally skilled shot was measured against hers, Sarah's arrow was revealed to be closer to the exact center by less than 2 millimeters, a margin so small it was almost within the range of measurement error, but decisive enough to determine the championship. As the final results were announced and Sarah realized that she had won the Regional Athletics Championship qualifier, earning her place in the competition that could change her life forever, she understood that her secret was not just revealed, it was triumphant. The waitress who had trained in secret for 3 years, who had taught herself a sport that others learned through privilege and institutional support, who had believed in her dream even when no one else knew it existed, had just proven that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places and that sometimes, the most powerful shot is the one that reveals everything you've been hiding. 3 years of secret training had culminated in a single shot that changed everything, and Sarah Martinez was no longer invisible to anyone.